Hello everyone, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's subject comes from patron Sam Kassan, who wanted me to take a look at the 2014 novel Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer. It's the first in a set of novels called the Southern Reach Trilogy, and it was adapted into a film in 2018. About the author. Jeff VanderMeer is actually fairly old for someone whose first mainstream success came in the 2010s. He was born in 1968 in Pennsylvania, although he spent most of his childhood in Fiji since his parents worked for the Peace Corps. He would later move back to America and live in upstate New York, and he went to college at the University of Florida in Gainesville. VanderMeer's writing career began in the 80s while he was still in high school, and for the most part he wrote short stories in the horror and fantasy genres. He was apparently inspired by the book The Infernal Desire Machines of Dr. Hoffman, known in the United States as The War of Dreams. The book is very postmodern and feminist, and VanderMeer hadn't realized just how provocative a speculative fiction story could be until he read it. As such, VanderMeer's fiction mostly belongs to something called the New Weird genre. New Weird is a kind of speculative fiction that borrows elements of horror, fantasy, and science fiction to tell stories about terrible people or terrible situations, and they usually end on a dark note. H.P. Lovecraft is considered a strong influence on the genre, although with less racism and more feminism. In 2014, VanderMeer published all three novels of the Southern Reach trilogy: Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. Each of the novels follows different protagonists, although they all have to do with Area X, a region on the Florida coast being taken over by a mysterious force. They also involve the Southern Reach, a secret agency that has the job of exploring and understanding Area X. VanderMeer has said that the main inspiration for the books was a trip to the St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, a park in the Florida Panhandle that has an exceptional amount of biodiversity. His other main inspiration was a series of creepy dreams. VanderMeer was already an established author when the Southern Reach trilogy came out, and so Paramount optioned the movie rights in 2013 while he was still writing them. The movie version of Annihilation came out in 2018, and while I understand it was a critically successful movie, it was also a financial bust, and the story of the movie only has a passing resemblance to the book, by intention. But then this review isn't about the movie version, so let's move on. The review. An expedition of 4 women enter the mysterious Area X with the goals of exploring the area, gathering samples, and otherwise making sense of a strange phenomenon. The team members are unnamed and consist of the psychologist who leads the team, the anthropologist, the surveyor, and the biologist, the last of whom is the novel's first-person narrator. The team first explores a spiraling underground tunnel that doesn't appear on their map, and which the biologist insists on calling the Tower. They find a rambling and glowing sentence written on the wall of the tower using an unknown fungus, and when the biologist touches the letters, they release spores into her face. The spores free her from the mind control hypnotism the psychologist used on the rest of the team, and they also sharpen her senses and her reflexes. After that, the expedition members die one by one, although in each case it's because of human decisions rather than the hazards of Area X. Once the biologist is alone, she decides to head north rather than look for an exit, because the reason she joined the expedition was to find her missing husband. She leaves behind her journal at this point, and so the story ends. Annihilation is very disjointed, with the biologist writing frequent asides about her personal history and her history with her husband. Now this is a fairly common structure, especially in postmodern fiction, but I can't help but think that VanderMeer's experience as a short story author also had something to do with it. Novels and short stories are very different kinds of fiction, and by creating these asides, VanderMeer was able to create a more episodic novel and a main narrative that was much shorter than the actual word count. And I don't mean any of this disparagingly. I just think it's an interesting point about how short story authors transition to longer formats. Moving on, I can definitely believe that this book was inspired by a trip to a wildlife refuge. I figure that's the reason why VanderMeer made the protagonist and narrator a biologist. It's because that would give him an excuse to wax eloquent about nature and go into detail about the various plants and animals that the biologist encounters throughout the story. As such, the nature descriptions are definitely one of the highlights of the book. Now, the thing I'm not so fond of is the way the story uses hypnosis. Once again, my patrons have accidentally lined up an interesting juxtaposition, because while Sundiver has a very realistic depiction of hypnosis, Annihilation's hypnosis is straight-up Hollywood mind control. 3 of the team members were hypnotized repeatedly before entering Area X, and in this depiction, hypnotized people have no memory of what happens during a hypnosis session. They can be forced to ignore or forget certain things, and when someone says the magic trigger words, the hypnotized person is compelled to follow orders and act against their own will and intentions. As a matter of fact, the book's title gets a name drop as a trigger word because annihilation is the word that will make a hypnotized person commit suicide. I get that the book isn't trying to be hard science fiction, but it still bugs me when stories resort to this kind of stereotype. Something else I should mention is that if you're expecting any sort of explanation or resolution to what's happening in Area X, you should prepare to be disappointed. It's just not that kind of story, and from what I read about the other 2 novels, they don't bother explaining anything either. The book has a dreamlike quality where things happen and they inspire deep emotions, but there are no explanations for any of the hows or whys, and there's no expectation of explanations. The protagonist may be a biologist, but she's really a pretty terrible scientist. And that's actually a part of her backstory. The biologist kept losing her grants because she got so wrapped up in observing that she forgot to do any testing or analyzing. Overall, I don't think the novel Annihilation is for everyone. However, if you're the kind of person who likes a novel that's more dream than reality, and if you don't mind a postmodernist non-linear narrative, then this is certainly one of the better examples of it that I've come across. The analysis. As you might have guessed from the fact that I name-dropped H.P. Lovecraft again, this is another work that falls under the cosmic horror umbrella. In particular, the book emphasizes the fact that humans are really only a small part of the world's ecosystem, and for everything we know about biology, there are still a dozen things we don't know. The cause of Area X is a complete mystery. It might be an alien life form corrupting Earth life, it could be a research project gone horribly wrong, or, for all anyone knows, it could be the soul of Gaia itself, reclaiming her surface from the vile clutches of humanity. The biologist is woefully underinformed when she enters Area X, and everything she learns in the area only leads to more questions. And that's entirely the point of this book, that we will never know all of the answers, that we will never run out of questions. And if we dare to think that we do know everything, then all we'll do is get people killed. I mean, not all of the expedition members die because of human arrogance, but it is notable that they all died because of each other's actions and not because of Area X. Something else that holds a deep meaning in Annihilation is the glow that the biologist feels inside her when she gets infected by the spores. She characterizes the glow as something dangerous, something that will eventually consume her. But until then, it gives her immunity to mind control, sharper senses, faster reflexes, and rapid regeneration. The biologist may be losing her humanity, but what she's becoming seems to be superior. So while she may not know what's happening to her, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. The recurring theme of this series has been beware the unknown. But with this story, we don't get a variation on that so much as we get the opposite. According to Annihilation, you shouldn't beware the unknown. You should embrace it, become one with it. After all, everything is unknown to some extent. Even the things we take for granted or dismiss as being unimportant. And so if we really want to take the next step forward as a person or as a species, the first thing we have to admit is that the only thing we know is that we know nothing. And therefore, everything is the unknown. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.